Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is controversial, surrounding Stephanie Lazarus. It's a strange one to say the least. It follows the murder of Sherri Rasmussen in 1986 that for more than 20 years was thought to be a result of a robbery gone wrong. But it wasn't, let me tell you. Let's just get into the case. It was suggested by IVM, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have, and I really found this one very interesting. So let us begin with a man, a woman, and their relationship. The man in question was called John Rutan, and in 1978 he was studying in UCLA University. He met a woman called Stephanie Lazarus. She was also at the same university. She was studying political science while he was studying mechanical engineering. Now, John has said that they were never officially a couple, so they never were put down on pen and paper as being together, but they were very much friends with benefits, essentially. They fooled around a lot whilst in university and slept together and, you know, things like that. Stephanie would mess around. She'd steal his clothes whilst he was showering and leave him naked. She would also take photos of him whilst he was asleep, naked. Which, you know, is normal to some people, I guess. Either way, whatever you put their relationship down to, it carried them through university before they left in 1984 and sort of moved apart and got jobs and things like that. Stephanie gained her badge and joined the LAPD. John went on to work for a hard drive manufacturer and he moved on with his life. It was in June of 1984 when he would meet Sherri Rasmussen. Sherri was born on the 7th of February in 1957 to parents Nels and Loretta. At 16, she started college. She went to Loma Linda University. By her late 20s, she was the nursing director at Glendale Activist Medical Center. She would often give presentations for nurses and partake in teaching classes, as well as taking them herself. The pair hit it off, they began dating, and everything moved really fast. But they really liked each other. Sherri had dreams of changing the world, changing nursing as a whole. Strangely enough, for John's 25th birthday, Stephanie Lazarus decided that she was going to throw him a surprise birthday party. Now, they had never really been a couple, according to John, but it had been 2 years since they were fooling around. And so out of the blue, she throws him this party, but she didn't know that he was in this relationship, serious relationship with Sherri. When she found out, she was furious, to say the least. And she would do things like write letters to his mother. This was in August of 85. She wrote a letter to his mother saying, "I'm truly in love with John and this past year has torn me up." At some point during all of this, she ends up going to John's condo and they end up sleeping together for closure, apparently. At this point, Sherri was actually John's fiance. But for Stephanie, it did not have the desired effect. She got no closure from it whatsoever, if that was the intention, or whether she just wanted to sleep with him again. But instead, it just made everything worse, and she was kind of a little bit obsessive over him. She started going around to his house, like, all the time, which, of course, made his fiancé uncomfortable. You don't want somebody that you have potentially, that you saw in university around your house all the time when you've not even seen them for years. It's just, I don't know, it made her feel very uncomfortable in her own home, which isn't very nice. She would also do things like go around and ask John to like wax her skis, and then she'd leave and then John would do it. Sherri would tell him not to and that she didn't want him to, but he would just be like, "I'm doing it," and he would do it anyway. And Sherri thought it was odd, especially since every time Stephanie came around, she was, you know, dressed in these flattering workout clothes, you know. She seemed like she was trying to get John's attention, and of course Sherri did not like it. Once she had left, Sherri asked if their relationship was really over because what she's seeing is strange. And he tells her that it is, that they never really had one in the first place, that they were just friends. A few days later, Stephanie comes back to pick up her skis that John has so kindly waxed for her. She came in her uniform, she was armed, and it kind of seemed like she was just trying to intimidate Sherri in a sense. Like, look at me with my gun, kind of thing. Sherri and John went on to get married in the November of 1985. And Stephanie kept coming round. Sherri pleaded with John to not let her come round anymore, that she felt really uncomfortable about it all. But he pretty much just said that there was nothing going on and that she should ignore her. According to Nels, which was Sherri's father, Stephanie even went over to Sherri's office on one occasion and would say that her relationship with John was not over, and that if she couldn't have him, no one could. She often told her parents that Stephanie was not right, that she thought that she was out to get her. On one occasion, she leaves the condo and Stephanie's there, stood across the street in full police uniform, just staring. And a few days before the incident, she even told her that she felt like she was being watched and followed, and feared that Stephanie was actually stalking her as she walked across the streets. On the 24th of February in 1986, Sherri was due into work that day and she was supposed to attend this class. Now, she was kind of toying with the idea as to not going in. At this point, she's 29 years old. She didn't normally do that kind of thing. Like, she was really, really good at her job and had the dreams of revolutionising nursing, which is why she would often attend these classes. But that class in particular didn't take a fancy that day. She felt it was a little bit pointless and essentially didn't want to go in. So while she's computing all this as to whether she's going to ring in sick or not kind of thing, John is busy getting ready for work, and she's still in bed. At this point, they've been married for just 3 months. So John leaves work at 7:20 and he arrives at his desk by 8 a.m. He tries to call Sherri a bit later on, but he doesn't get a response. He just figured that maybe she'd gone to work after all. Maybe she decided that she was going to go in and she changed her mind, and that's why she wasn't answering. He then called her work at some point and a work secretary hadn't seen her. Now, that wasn't abnormal either, because if Sherri had a class in the morning or whatever, then maybe she didn't go into the office first. She went to the class, and so that's why the secretary hadn't seen her. It wasn't abnormal. She would do that a lot. He called her another 3 or 4 times, but wasn't too worried about her or anything like that. He finished his day at work and he came home to find that the garage door was open and her silver BMW that he'd bought her as this wedding present had wasn't there, and so he just thought that she was out. There was also some glass on the floor, but again, he didn't really think too much of that. So he goes upstairs and he finds Sherri on the living room floor, deceased, having been shot 3 times. She was on her back, her face was badly swollen, and she had been beaten, and so he called the police. Police arrived, the house was a complete mess. There were a few things missing. They had all of these electronics stacked up on the side, and one had a bloody sort of print on it. They had bloody handprints everywhere, and there was clear sign of a struggle, and she had defensive wounds. She had a bite mark on her inner forearm, and she had a lot of damage to her right eye as well. It was actually thought that she may have been hit with a vase. It looked like at one point someone tried to tie her up, and then there was this blanket found with a hole in it, and so it was thought that that was used to try and suppress the shots. She was still in her nightdress, so it looked like she had just been surprised at home. Like, she hadn't even got a chance to get dressed yet, and somebody came in. So, knowing what you know, and the police also did know that later on, who possibly could have done this to Sherri? Could it have been, Stephanie Lazarus, the LAPD cop? No, of course it couldn't have been Stephanie Lazarus, who was seemingly stalking her and saying that if I can't have John, nobody can. Definitely not. It was burglars. Yeah. Burglars came in and they didn't think that Sherri was home, and she startled them, and then they killed her. And they took the BMW as their getaway car and off they went. The thing to back this up was there had been a couple of burglaries in the area, and on one occasion a woman had been held at gunpoint. And it was said that there was these 2 Latin men that were involved in that. They questioned John, but not too extensively. It seemed like the detective had made up his mind on this one. It was definitely clear-cut, and it was definitely a burglary gone wrong. 10 days later, the silver BMW was found, but that didn't give them anything either. A very, very strange thing that went missing from the house, which I found really, really odd for a burglar to take, was Sherri and John's wedding license. I mean, I don't know, maybe they collected things like that or something. Just a bit weird. John pretty much believed what the police were saying, and, he moved away and moved on with his life, because that's all you can do. You just have to carry on. Sherri's parents, however, did not believe the police one little bit. Of course, they have all of these things that Sherri's telling them, that this female cop was stalking her and was telling her things, like threatening things, and just, you know, not being very copply. And which is a word I've just made up myself right now. Another thing was, they said the fight lasted at least an hour to up to an hour and a half. Now, they're thinking that these two Latin men who did these burglaries came into this house and burgled it. Her father really did not believe that Sherri could have lasted an hour to an hour and a half fighting two Latin men, like, at all. And obviously that coupled with the female officer stalking and intimidating her. Regardless, all of that information was given to the police for them to look over and look into, and they just never did, and eventually her case would run cold. In the meantime, while Sherri's case is running cold, Stephanie Lazarus is climbing the ranks of the LAPD. She made detective, she moved on from John, she met a man called Scott Young who was a fellow cop, and they got married and they ended up adopting a child together, a little girl. She was really well respected. She had this impeccable record that was very clean, and would even do things like go out fundraising. Sherri's parents didn't give up, and they kept trying to keep her case in the media, doing appeals and anything they could to try and keep her case alive and to keep it out there in the public eye, so that people remembered that this horrible thing had happened to Sherri, and they didn't believe it was a burglary, and even if it was a burglary, they wanted to get the people who did it regardless. As a result of that, you know, a case would get picked up again, but then it would simply be put back down again and it would just go nowhere. Let's skip forward 18 years, which is a huge amount of time, and a criminalist, Jennifer Butterworth, was looking into Sherri Rasmussen's case. She was sort of re-examining the forensic evidence that they had, and she actually found that they had taken a swab from Sherri's arm of saliva of the killer, well, the probable killer, on that day. And it actually turned out that it had been sat in the coroner's freezer for that entire 18 years and it had not been touched. So she gets it, she tests it, and she finds out that it's actually from a woman. Surprise, surprise. Jennifer dug deeper into the case and she came out with a few women suspects, and eventually managed to rule them out, and she was left with one. And can you guess who that one female suspect was? Stephanie Lazarus. So she puts this forward, and, you know, they told her that she's just being ridiculous. The case is solved. It was a robbery gone wrong, and stop looking into it, basically. So Jennifer did not look into it anymore, and once again the file was picked up and put back down again. A few years later, two new detectives open Sherri's case once more, and they begin from the beginning. They honestly didn't believe the burglary theory at all. They thought that night someone entered, went upstairs, and shot 2 rounds at Sherri, but missed. They hit the sliding glass door, which of course shattered. Sherri ran for the panic button upstairs, and this person followed her, and that is when they began their fight. Sherri got this intruder into a headlock, which is where they believe the bite came from. They believe that this person bit Sherri, and obviously the pain and the shock from that caused her to loosen her grip, and the intruder slipped from it, and then they hit her over the head with the vase. They then shot her in the chest, retrieved the blanket to try and dull the other shots, because obviously a shot is really, really loud, and they shot her twice more. Again, as I said before, they found blood everywhere. It was even on the CD player, and the blood that they actually found was in fact Sherri's, and so it was believed by them that it was put there after the fact, and it was made to look like a robbery, and that's why it was put there. The detectives caught a break in the case when they came across a note in the file. It said, John Rutten called, verified Lazarus, P.O. as former girlfriend. Now P.O. apparently stood for police officer. And so as a result of that, they began to look into Stephanie Lazarus. They searched up her name in their system, and they found that she was a detective with the LAPD. Everything seemed to be falling into place. It all began making sense, and they started to look into this well-respected detective, who I believe at this point was in her 50s, about 51, although I may be mistaken with that. They found out that on the day of the murder, she was off work, that a .38 caliber gun was used to murder Sherri, and that, well, Stephanie had a 38 caliber gun, but, you know, a few weeks after the murder, it was stolen. Yeah, she reported it as stolen, so someone stole that gun, unfortunately. They decided to put her under surveillance, and I believe they did it for about 2 weeks. And finally, they followed her to a Costco, where she discarded a straw that she'd been using in the bin, and they picked it up. Much like the Golden State Killer. They tested that DNA with the DNA they already had of the woman, and, well, it matched. Stephanie was the one that had bitten Sherri that night. The police brought her in for questioning under this pretense that she was going to question this perp, she was doing something to do with art and things like that in her career. She was interviewing a lot of people with regards to art thefts and stuff like that, so that's how they drew her in. They thought she was this, you know, smart cop who had a gun, and so they didn't want to just bombard her with it. They tricked her. They said that they needed her to come and interview this person with regards to this art case, and she came in. But instead of her interviewing a perp, the perp was her. She left the interview shortly after this and then was just arrested straight away and just brought back in, this time in handcuffs. She was actually allowed to retire from the LAPD. And then in 2010, Stephanie Lazarus stood trial for the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. She, of course, pled not guilty. Her motive was basically pretty obvious. She wanted John. She tried to get John, but John didn't want her. He wanted Sherri. She had actually declared her love to him, apparently, but he didn't want her. And so her only solution for that was to take Sherri out of the picture. It apparently worked for a while, because after that they did meet up and they apparently went on a holiday. But, you know, not long after that they went their separate ways and married different people. So essentially she killed Sherri to get John, but then didn't get John anyway. So even more tragic, because it's tragic that she killed Sherri anyway in the first place. But then, what for? Like, she did it to get John and didn't get John. I'm not saying that, you know what I mean? I'm not saying it as a bad thing, you know what I mean? I can't understand why she murdered her in the first place anyway, because it's just horrible. But yeah. In March of 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of the first degree murder of Sherri Rasmussen, and she was sentenced to 27 years in jail. This case was insane. Like, the cops around it were just so blind. Like, no, definitely couldn't have been one of us. Must have been a burglary, even though there was so much evidence of things pointing to Stephanie in the first place, which they were given, they just ignored. I know that the DNA testing at the time wasn't great, and, you know, they couldn't have done that, but they didn't even look into her, and that is what is so frustrating. They're literally being told that Sherri, who was murdered, was being stalked by a woman, a cop, Stephanie, and they just ignored it. I'm glad that this case was finally solved after 23 years. It should not have taken that long by any means. And poor Jennifer, when she was looking into it and was putting all this information forward, she was again told to just disregard it. But in the end, Stephanie Lazarus was finally caught. And the thing is, there are a lot more corrupt cops out there that, you know, it's really bad. Take Wayne Couzens, who murdered Sarah Everard. You know, it happens. It's out there a lot more than you think. But the fact that the police never want to look into it is really frustrating. Because at the end of the day, there are monsters out there, and some of them are in the police force. But yeah, that is the end of the case. If you have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to join the pack. To all my regulars, thank you so much. I appreciate you beyond words. Like, I obviously wouldn't be here without you guys, so thank you so much for watching. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the case of Stephanie Lazarus and the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.